we all know about the amalgamation of 1914 to a greater or lesser degree. That was the amalgamation of southern Nigeria with northern Nigeria, which is the real thrust of this discussion. But there was an earlier amalgamation that people really don't know much about, which I hope to bring to your attention now. You see, one needs to understand that colonization was not a humanitarian exercise or a charitable venture. It was a commercial venture, but with a political underpinning. So the object was profits. The purpose was gain. And the ultimate driver of this project in the period that we were concerned about it, he wasn't one that initiated it. It was a long-standing project. But the ultimate driver was the then colonial secretary, Joseph Chamberlain, who Basil mentioned. He was colonial secretary from 1895 to 1906. His claim to fame was that he was actually the longest running or longest serving colonial secretary. Now, he was just made for the project because, as I've told you, the colonization was commercial stroke political. Chamberlain was a commercial stroke political animal. He had made his money in industry. He was a very rich guy. Made his money from a patent that had been granted to his uncle for the manufacture, an exclusive patent for the manufacture of screws at the heart of the Industrial Revolution. So he had made money. It was after he had made his money, and part of the way he made his money or a key part of how he made his money was his business tactics, and that was monopoly. He bought all competitors out and effectively established himself as a virtual monopoly in that enterprise. That is an important detail because you see that playing out when it comes to the formation of Nigeria. How Goldie went about buying up and consolidating the presence of the Royal Niger Company to the point that it itself became a monopoly. So, as I said, Chamberlain was a hybrid character. He made his money in enterprise. He was a monopolist, but he was an imperialist above everything else. And so he carried across his commercial strategies to the process of empire building. Now, I mentioned an amalgamation that preceded the 1914 one that we don't hear enough about. I only became aware of it very recently from reading the 6-volume biography. And it concerned a trade-off over a country that you would never imagine had anything to do with Nigeria. A trade-off over their respective interests in Madagascar. Now, here's the context. If you look at the map of West Africa, you will see that Nigeria stands taller than the neighboring countries on that west coast, taller than Ghana, taller than Togo. It's almost like there's a sort of a roof that was added, almost like a loft extension, or a penthouse, if you like, depending on which language you prefer. You'll see that Nigeria stands taller. The reason for that is this. That extra chunk should have been part of French territory. Under the agreements and the sharing formula that had been agreed at the Berlin Conference of 18 1884. What happened was that both France and Britain had competing interests in the island of Madagascar. What Chamberlain negotiated was a trade-off, that Britain would release its territorial claims in Madagascar in return for that extra slice that is now what I call the rooftop, that Islamic strip across the north, which included Bornu and the Sokoto Empire territory. Now, this is important because there were no resources in that area. And so you ask yourself the question, why then was Chamberlain so keen in acquiring that strip of territory? It had everything to do with the future planning for Nigeria and the future political control of Nigeria. So by virtue of that 1898 deal over Madagascar, you had an amalgamation of that Sokoto and Islamic strip with what was almost wholly a Christian South/Middle Belt, which had been assembled by the Royal Niger Company. So that's 1898. Then, as Basil explained, you have the Declaration of the Protectorates that comes in 1900, before we get to the 1914 amalgamation. Now, at this point, I would like to read to you an extract from my book, A Fatherless People, concerning the amalgamation, which will bring all the issues to the fore. I subtitled the section, The Economics of Amalgamation, and it goes like this. The adoption of different systems of administration in the North and South was not of itself problematic, since the peoples of each territory were secure in their own space. The problem which has plagued Nigerians, even up to the present, was the appointment of Lugard in 1912 to unite the two territories in pursuit of the ideal of one Nigeria, a British policy objective born of two calculations, one short-term, the other long-term. The short-term calculation was administrative costs. The longer-term reckoning was the protection of the imperial hold on the territories, particularly on the resource-rich southern Nigeria. It was a case of unite and rule. The Niger Committee had counselled delay for the amalgamation for the practical reason of the difficulty of finding the man with the right experience and physical constitution to cope with the climate. Even after Lugard had proved his mettle by his pacification and rule of northern Nigeria, further delay came from the colonial office's battle to keep southern Nigeria from treasury control. Imperial policy was that colonies should be self-funding. As long as the colonial office did not need treasury funds, the permanent officials at the colonial office could enjoy maximum control of policy within the territory in their interface between the colonial governor and the colonial secretary. With southern Nigeria yielding annual surpluses and northern Nigeria producing annual deficits, these officials were protective of the freedom of action that they enjoyed over southern Nigeria. In London and in northern Nigeria, it was assumed that until the entire country was pacified and a strong government established throughout, a substantial military force maintained at substantial expense would be necessary. The colony itself was unable to generate funds for either its civil government or for a military force. During the years 1899 to 1913, an annual contribution was received from southern Nigeria. This never exceeded £75,000. Therefore, an annual grant in aid of revenue from the British Treasury, the major source of income for northern Nigeria, was necessary. The funding challenge in northern Nigeria hit crisis points in 1911-1912 budget, which showed the need for a substantial treasury grant in the sum of £365,000. With such a level of dependency, it was looking as if the Colonial Office would have to submit to Treasury control. To avoid this, it proposed a scheme of amalgamation of northern Nigeria with southern Nigeria, requiring an annual grant from the Treasury of £100,000 for a fixed period of 5 years, on terms that thereafter the Colonial Office would do all that could be done to secure the financial stability of the amalgamated Nigeria. On 12th of October 1912, the scheme was approved. The decision that remained was the long-deferred one of who was to effect the amalgamation. The man making the decision was the Colonial Secretary, Lewis Vernon Harcourt. Having overseen the amalgamation of Lagos and the Yoruba mainland with the East, with the creation of southern Nigeria in 1906, and implemented a successful economic development program which had yielded annual budget surpluses, Egerton was the obvious choice for the job if the agenda for the amalgamated territory was development on the southern Nigeria model. But this was not the plan. Instead, it was Lugard's model of administration that was decided upon, and the choice of Lugard for the job logically followed. They could not have Lugard's ideas without Lugard. Lugard was formally appointed governor of northern and southern Nigeria in May 1912. He left for Nigeria in September for a survey, returned to England in the spring, and presented his amalgamation plan to the Colonial Office on 9th of May 1913. The essence of the plan was as follows. Amalgamated Nigeria was to be divided into northern and southern provinces. The original colony of Lagos was detached from the southern province and separately administered, and the Southern Nigeria Legislative Council restricted to Lagos. The Governor General would legislate for the rest of Nigeria with the advice of an executive council composed of officials from his staff. There would be 2 lieutenant governors, one for northern and one for southern Nigeria, and an administrator for Lagos. Some departments would be fully amalgamated. Others would be supervised by deputy heads with separate establishments in the north and south, and come directly under the respective lieutenant governors. The only significant unifying institution would be the Governor General, who would be in a strongly authoritarian position, as all financial estimates will emanate from him. Lugard might have been amused by his deification by the Nigerian president, Goodluck Ebele Jonathan, when at the official celebrations for the centenary of the amalgamation, he said that, quotes, "The amalgamation of Nigeria was not a mistake, but an act of God." The flippancy of Jonathan's remark is rivaled only by the words of the British Colonial Secretary, Lord Harcourt, in a run-up to the amalgamation on 1st of January 1914. Quotes, "We have released northern Nigeria from the leading strings of the Treasury. The promising and well-conducted youth is now on an allowance of his own and is about to effect an alliance with a southern lady of means. I have issued the special license, and Sir Frederick Lugard will perform the ceremony. May the union be fruitful and the couple constant." As the extracts concerning the amalgamation. Now, there's a lot of confusion in our community as to how in detail the amalgamation happened. There's talk that there were only 6 Nigerians who signed the Treaty of Amalgamation. There was no Treaty of Amalgamation. It was an edict of the British government signed by King George V in Windsor Castle, witnessed by some lords of the country. That was the instruments that effected the amalgamation. There's also hear and read of talk that the amalgamation treaty was only supposed to last for 100 years. There was no such time limit on the edict. The edict is the edict. The amalgamation was intended to be perpetual. It was supposed to be forever and ever. And so all talk of the union has lapsed. Unfortunately, that's a result of history not being taught to our people. And so we're left with hearsay and beer parlor conversations about these very, very important issues. So when we then go back to the fundamental reason for the amalgamation, it is this. There were two countries, southern Nigeria and northern Nigeria. They were being run as separate countries, separate colonies. The reason why they were fused was this. The resources were in the south. The oil had been discovered, contrary to the narrative, or what we were told, and what you'll find on the website of Shell, that oil was first discovered in Nigeria, in Olubiri, in 1956. The truth of the matter is that the oil had been discovered as early as 1908. And as early as 1909, Nigeria was already producing something like 2,000 barrels of oil per day. As I explained recently, we now have to understand that the 1956 date needs to be treated as the date of disclosure or confession of the existence of oil resources rather than the date of discovery. And what makes this clear that the oil was already around was that all the subsequent British shenanigans in the manipulation of particularly southern Nigeria was all driven by the fact that the oil was there. If you recall, 1906 was when the South, the Lagos colony, which is really Yoruba land, is deceptive sometimes when we refer to the Lagos colony. You tended to think it's Lagos Island. It's actually Lagos and the Yoruba mainland was amalgamated with what was the Oil Rivers Protectorate to make southern Nigeria. So 1906, those two southern parts were brought together. But then, strangely, by 1st of April 1939, those two were being separated. There's no other reason than the fact that the oil was there in the South. It would not be because of commodities like cocoa and palm oil that the British Colonial Office will have got to the extent of dividing in 1939 what they had united in 1906, especially when you consider that the much larger North was left as one entity. So 1939, the smaller southern Nigeria was divided into two, eastern region, western region, whereas the North, much bigger, much more diverse, was maintained as a whole. What was driving it was the calculations for who would rule Nigeria when the British left. The British weren't planning to leave. Again, this is a very important detail. That their departure came much earlier than they anticipated. They expected to be, even at the time of just before the Second World War, they expected to be around for at least another 100 years. What brought the timetable forward for their departure was the Second World War, and in particular, the terms that Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the US president, the terms that he imposed as a condition of American entry in that war on the side of Britain and its allies. That agreement was secured in 1941, and the only reason why independence did not come at the end of the Second World War in 1945 was simply because Franklin Delano Roosevelt died 2 or 3 weeks before the end of the war. And once the war ended, the Brits were able to deflect American attention to the Cold War against Russia and to deprioritize decolonization. Decolonization only came back on the agenda after when Vietnam came to the fore, because Churchill had been asked by Dwight Eisenhower, the U.S. president, effectively almost like a payback, that they needed Britain to come into the Vietnam War on America's side. When Churchill refused, that's when Eisenhower brought the decolonization agenda back onto the table, and this time insisted that Britain and France must get out and dismantle their empires. But that simply having had the early warning from Roosevelt, they already started the advanced planning for what should happen when they leave, who will run the show after their departure. And this is where the bargain over Madagascar now came to the fore, because remember, as I said earlier, it was that Madagascar deal that brought the Fulani Empire into what we now know as Nigeria, and it wasn't because of any resources in that area, but they were seen as a strategic partner, very similar to what happened in South Africa with the Boers, who are the descendants of Dutch. These were Dutch settlers in South Africa. Again, the Boers were not indigenous to the territorial space and became natural partners and allies for the Brits, who too were not indigenous. And so they saw common ground. And so that then is the story of the first amalgamation of 1898 that brought the Fulani Empire, the Sokoto Caliphate, into the Nigeria space, and then followed by the second amalgamation of 1914, which fused northern Nigeria with southern Nigeria. And it was, I noticed that the title of the discussion touches on northern attempts to secede. Yes. It was the North. It was the North that first sought to secede from the country, for the simple reason that Ahmadu Bello never made any apologies for the fact that he wanted nothing to do with the South. The amalgamation of 1914 had not been consented to by either Northerners or Southerners. It was a British unilateral act in their own interest, with an eye on their future strategy for the control of the territory. The North, Ahmadu Bello in particular, as the leader of the Sokoto Caliphate, was concerned about the contamination, let me use that expression, of values that would arise from the fusion of a feudal top-down society, which was the North and which they were comfortable with this education-led almost universal education driven southern Nigeria. You can't have two operating systems running a particular computer. One has to give. It's either the feudal model, top-down and command-centered, or it's going to be the bottom-up education-driven model.